guys, I'm Brent.
I'm Lila, and you can find us on the web at www.braintrustlive.com.
Yes.
Guys, just in time for the holidays, COVID is surging literally everywhere. We're not even going to bring you numbers because it's like, what could the numbers tell you that us just screaming can't tell you?
Well, what's crazy about this is that I feel like I think we're back to generally focusing on this because it's so bad everywhere, but I knew how bad it had been. But I think that the election sucked up so much air here. I had
totally.
CNN on this morning, and they said that it was the 13th day in a row that we had over 100,000 cases. And I thought for certain they had to have been wrong about that.
I know.
But they weren't.
They were not.
It's
not everywhere.
Great, but it's like I do think that it has like taken a little bit of time to sort of like permeate everyone's mind. I think it was a happy distraction to, maybe not happy, but to focus on the election for a minute. It was certainly a distraction, maybe not a happy distraction.
Right. Well, also we have a federal government that's not doing anything anyway. So focusing on coronavirus feels a little pointless at times because you're just like, well, what does me panicking do? We don't seem to make any active choices to address any of these issues. So instead, it's just me panicking forever about a thing that no one is going to address.
Right. And it's what is so wild about it happening right before the holidays is that it seems like if we lived in a country of rational people, then like on some level, I would almost think that, I mean, it's never a good time to be peaking. But like, I would maybe think to myself, oh, well, maybe it's just sort of, worked out in a way that like this is happening right before Thanksgiving. So everyone will, their better senses will come to them and they will think to not stay home and do Thanksgiving with their families. But that's not the America that we live in.
Also, well, and I plan to go on an extended rant about this in a second. I feel like we are past the point where I think individual responsibility arguments even make sense. Like, I think we're sort of past the point where expecting everyone to just be sensible about this is even a fair thing to do because there's been so many mixed messages for 8 months now. If you're, whether or not we all know that the president's not someone to trust. We all know that the federal government has not necessarily been offering a lot of helpful guidance on this matter. And we know because of that, we've been trusting our governors, we've been trusting other people, and maybe Fauci, but like beyond that, we've just been sort of in the lurch. But I mean, the CDC just this week finally came up with a brilliant idea, which was to admit that masks also protect you, which is what I think they should have said, even if they couldn't say it definitively from the get-go, because one way to motivate human behavior is to tap into people's desire to not die themselves. So there's like choices that are being made much too late. And whether or not you are a person who thinks the president is trustworthy, if you are a person who thinks the president is trustworthy or generally just like tries to believe what the federal government says, then you are a person who's been getting incorrect information for months, and correcting that now is going to be an impossible thing to do. And also you're not just, it's like how like no one is just going to be like, wait a minute, I've been wrong about everything in my life forever and I should change everything that I think of. Like no one ever spontaneously is just like, I've been wrong. Like you need to have some information needs to break through to you. And like, no one is providing that information to like a vast majority of Americans. They are to us. But I think, like there are some things that are starting to be cracks in that facade. One is that this White House cluster has now 150 Secret Service members have COVID now, which is like,
I know
that's too many. And also those are the people that if you're the president, you want to be on your side when you're trying to steal an election.
Hello.
So this is like not smart planning on Trump's side anyway.
Yeah, you want 150 Secret Service people helping you when you're attempting to squat in the White House.
Squatting in the White House. You want them to not kick you out.
Right.
But also, you're leaving local governments to institute, various kinds of stay-at-home advisories and various new rules. And because of that, they're not able to follow, they're not able to have the impact as they would if it was a nationwide,
I totally agree. And even some of the statewide things, I think that there just seems to be like a real disconnect for people with like, some of the rules and what, whether there's also, there's no, we're not giving, I mean, I guess they were sort of like technically giving out fines for like people not wearing masks.
Right, but
there's also sort of like, there's no enforcement, there's no repercussions for anyone. And also I think that like, it's hard when also, I mean, this is just like one specific instance, and like I'm more mad at Gavin Newsom for going to the French Laundry because I myself have been wanting to go to the French Laundry for years and have made numerous attempts to try and get myself on the wait list to go to the French Laundry.
That joker just fucking waltzed in there.
But yeah, he just waltzed in there for like a lobbyist meal and like didn't follow any of the rules that he has set for the state of California. And like, I'm not blaming him for the entirety of like the spike that we're having in California now just because he went to the French Laundry. But like, I think just to your point though, like it does sort of like, it's a good representation of the idea of just like what people are feeling in terms of like what specifically they are going to do to be able to stop something that feels out of control.
Well, and also like I think this is also something where I think our just general like proclivities as American and the language that we use in our political discourse is really harmful here. I feel like I think about this a lot when I go on my rant about straws, because I know there's been a lot of like pressure on individual people to stop using straws, when in reality it should be on companies that distribute straws to stop us from using straws. That like the idea that Starbucks still gives out straws is a bigger problem than the fact that I sometimes take one of those straws. You can ask individual people to inconvenience themselves, but not everyone will. Well, you can make it impossible for them to use straws by not having them give out straws to everyone for every kind of thing. And that's,
we've talked about this a million different times over climate change, which is ultimately what straws is. But I mean, like what you personally, like you taking a 5-minute shower as opposed to a 7-minute shower.
Right, when 80% of the water is being used by the agricultural industry is not necessarily saving enough water to do anything with. And that, I think we have this tendency to kind of individualize the blame to problems we're trying to socialize the solutions to.
Yeah.
And I think when we think about what, a lot of people have called me this week and rightfully frustrated that people are just like flouting, these recommendations.
Yeah.
And I have started to find myself get more and more irritated by that focus, just because it's like, look, 150 million Americans will literally always act a fool in any situation. Sometimes we are those Americans, other times it's other Americans. Sure. But 100% of the time, you can trust that most Americans are going to be acting a fool. And so as a public health official, it is your job to think, how do we prevent people who are definitely going to try to act a fool from doing it? Right. And you can't do it by not giving them, clear guidance from the get-go in a huge public health emergency, and then be like, how are these people so, these people are endangering the lives of everyone and they're so vindictive and horrible and cruel? Because I don't think that a lot of them are thinking of it that way, in large part because no one has encouraged them to. So like in California and New York, we have been encouraged to think about this as a socialized problem, not just an individual problem. But that doesn't stop us from, and I understand the compulsion to do this, because it's like, you want to, you also see people in your individual life acting in these ways, and those people, it is okay to be like, hey, that's annoying and you should not be selfish assholes. But when you look at the problem overall is not that 150 million Americans are just like horrible human beings. The problem is that you can always count on 150 million Americans to act a fool.
Right. So what do you do in the face of that?
So what do you do? Like, instead of saying like, what is wrong with these people? I think we should be asking like, what is wrong with their governor? What is wrong with our president? What is wrong with the legislatures in the states that they live in, that nobody is giving them clear enough guidance that their sort of intense desire to act like a fool, which is what everyone is always doing all the time, is overcome. And I think this is, something that on the left we struggle with in particular, because we are often proposing socialized solutions to things. And I think because it can be very frustrating to see people not sort of reflecting what you would like to see about human behavior out in the world, it can be easy to start, getting mad at individuals for acting a fool. But I think the whole point of having a sort of global view of a crisis like this is that you can then think to yourself, okay, in a world where we can trust that some people will always act a fool, like, what can we do to save them from their bad instincts? What can we do to save ourselves from their bad instincts? Like, the issue is not individual choices at this point, it's policy. And we are not talking about it in the language of policy. We're talking about it in the language of sort of like whether or not, people in Iowa are wearing masks. And it's like, like maybe somebody should have been clearer from the get-go that they should do this, and then not allowed a huge seed of misinformation to get planted in half the country's minds about what was going on, and then also not allowed it to become a political identifier to be against wearing masks, and not allowed it to become a massive popular conspiracy theory, and not also allowed the trust in our government to erode to such a degree that people are willing to believe conspiracy theories for a reason.
Well, and that erosion has been,
and that's ongoing.
I was going to say that erosion did not happen in the, Democrats have been helping, erode people's level of trust in institutions and government in their, attempts to run away from big government over the last 30 years. So
these are all problems that have socialized solutions. They're not individual problems. The problem is not individuals acting inappropriately. The problem is a lack of guidance to those individuals. The problem is also by the time they got the guidance, there had already been a seed of doubt planted in them that allowed them to think that the guidance was some sort of giant conspiracy. The problem is so much bigger than just like individual choices. And I think also there can be this sense that like, and I think I know this because this is how people were talking about New York City when it hit New York City. There is this sense that if other people are having a problem like this, they must deserve it. Like the language almost confirms the idea that like if people weren't practicing proper social distancing or whatever in states where they had no guidance, where everything was open, where they were still having to go to work, where all of these things were happening, then somehow they deserve what comes to them. And the people of Iowa do not deserve a 50% positive test rate, whether or not they were acting a fool. They just don't, because they're people, and they are also just people trying their best, and whether or not they succeed at being their best all the time, like there is no one who deserves what comes to them with COVID just because they were, in our eyes, flouting the rules. Like I remember very early on in the crisis, Brent was like ranting and raving because some friend of his had gone to like a party or something like very early in the crisis, and he was like, aren't they watching Gavin Newsom's press briefings? And I was like, no,
they're
not watching them. No one else but you was watching them. And so Brent was like incredibly informed, but like that information really hadn't trickled down to the rest of us yet. And like you have to think like, how do you make sure that information trickles down and gets to those people? Because everyone's instinct is to act stupid all the time. That's just people. And that's us too. I mean, like, I think there's also this sense that like some of us have been trying so hard that we never screw up. And it's like, we are also constantly in a battle to stop acting like fools in public ourselves. Like, just because you vote Democrat does not mean that you are not constantly in a battle to stop yourself from acting like a fool.
Well, and I think and what you were talking about just in terms of, whether people deserve it or, whatever, it's like you said, the people of Iowa don't deserve a 50% positivity rate. This is one of the things that I think has been, as it has gone on, and I sort of like have come to realize what you have just been talking about. And I think a lot of people sort of are starting to get that. But that was one of the things that was triggering to me sort of as I started, coming to that conclusion myself, just because like that was one of the things that, is triggering for a lot of gay men, because it sort of like reeks of being blamed for the AIDS crisis. When the AIDS crisis, like, send your fire at Ronald Reagan, not at, the gay men who managed to get AIDS in the 80s. And that was, and it really is sort of like, it's not the exact same certainly, but it's a similar thing.
No, but this happens again and again.
Happens all the time.
It happens all the time. And I think it's easy to feel irritated with people that have not been living under the kinds of restrictions that we have, because it's been annoying and frustrating. And also we, in states where everything is locked down, we sort of see their lack of action extending our lockdown, extending our economic crisis, extending our housing crisis. And that's very frustrating, of course. But like the people of Iowa or North Dakota or South Dakota or whatever were not the problem here. Their governors were the problem. And that's who we should be training fire on, because there is someone in every state who could have acted to at least minimize this crisis.
Totally. Well, and Iowa is one of these
states. No one did.
Right. Iowa remains one of the only states to have never had a stay-at-home order. They didn't even have one in March.
No. So, and like, I feel like, the people of Iowa took a message from that was not, and that's not fair to be mad at them that they didn't take the message we took when we were ordered home for 6 weeks.
Right.
Like, that's just, it's too bad that they elected idiot governors, but they couldn't have known the pandemic was coming. I mean, that's just like, what happens when you have bad ideas. People are just having bad ideas all the time and they can't help themselves being terrible.
Right.
But like, it's this sort of like this frustration that we have has to be, I think, directed appropriately. And also we have to like really find a language to socialize the blame too, so that it's not, our socialized blame should be directed at the government, because those are our socialized representatives. Like, that's where we all get together to elect somebody to like be serving in our best interest. And that's really who is at fault in this kind of a situation. Individual people are not disease experts. They are not scientists. Many of them are not even informed about the basic facts of normal science, let alone pandemic science. And that's something that their public health officials and their governors should have known going in. It shouldn't be on them to know that they don't know things. You don't know what you don't know. Right. Nobody knows what they don't know. That's one of the big problems with everything.
Right.
That there are so many things that you don't know. And the problem is that many of these things are things you don't know enough about to know what you don't know about them.
Right. They are unknown.
I don't know about
they are unknown unknowns.
Exactly. I don't know about the finances of starting a business, but beyond that, I don't even know how to Google that question. Like that's every time that I've been in a situation where I've had to think about like what, like the finances of like incorporating or something like that. Like I have not even known what to type into Google about that question to figure out how to solve it. So like we can't use the language of the right, which is to individualize blame.
Right.
It's a public health crisis, and it is the blame is public. It's not private blame.
Yeah.
And I think that is a useful mentality to use to encourage everyone to have, so that nobody feels like it is their like personal decision that is on the line, that is at stake here. Like I think people shouldn't have had to make these kinds of decisions for themselves.
I agree.
That's why you hire a government. That's why we're paying these people to be working in these fancy buildings that are all like mini Capitol buildings.
Right. And if you are in a state or a city that is imposing new lockdowns, do follow those.
Yeah. Right. I mean, you should also do your best. But I think I talked about this in terms of how, Democratic strategy can't parrot individual frustration with Trump voters. Like we can't decide last week where I was like, we can individually decide to be very angry with those voters, but the Democratic Party can't decide, well, we're not even going to tell them what our message is. Like, we don't have to echo what their message is. We don't have to tell them what they want to hear, but we do have a responsibility, I think, to tell them what we're saying. And a lot of the time we're derelict even in that duty. And I think, we choose not to. And I think that's sort of a similar situation here, where it's like, you can't be mad at people for not knowing something that no one told them, or that they only heard from a source that we knew they wouldn't find trustworthy. Like that's not logical. Yeah. With that said, apparently the vaccines are coming, so everything's fine.
Whew. Right. Well, and this is a thing that like we've seen Fauci say multiple times, and any other public health expert, because I think that the good news about the vaccines has been something else where people are just like, great, we'll just get vaccinated. So like now let's just like, have like a giant nationwide orgy. Yeah. It's like, no, you can't do that yet either. Like that's not it.
The first thing that you should do is stay home.
Keep staying home. Right. Yeah.
Keep staying home. The second thing that you should do is probably not visit your grandparents this year.
Yes. Well,
don't hold large gatherings for the holidays.
Right. But it looks like we've got two good vaccine candidates, both at over 90%, one from Moderna and one from Pfizer. And it seems like they both of them might be able to get out in the latter part of December. Of course, that's only, I think they both say that they have certain tens of numbers of, like tens of millions, I think, of them ready to go. But it's like, they're going to go to the elderly. They're going to go to, it's like, it's going to be a minute before you, John Q. Public, can get vaccinated for this.
Yeah, probably. Fauci says that he thinks they may be able to start vaccinating people in December. Although I feel like that feels very optimistic to me, because the whole country shuts down in December. So like thinking anything will start ever in December is always risky, even in a big crisis like this.
Right. Well, they haven't even been approved yet. Everybody seems to think they will probably get approved for like emergency use. But like we're not to the point where like these are starting to ship to places.
No.
And it's already the middle part of November. So
Yeah, so he's saying for high risk groups it might be as early as December, but it's more likely that spring and summer is when it would be available to like regular people. The nice thing about the Moderna one is that unlike the Pfizer one, there'd been some reporting on the Pfizer one and there was a lot of drama because it's required they have to keep it at like a really cold temperature and nobody has any coolers.
Yeah, it's hard to store and to ship.
Too hard to store. And it doesn't last as long. The Moderna one has a much longer shelf life. It doesn't require some sort of uniquely cold freezer. It can be kept in regular freezers that other vaccines are kept in. And so I think that one is the one that probably is the lead candidate for. Yeah. And it's also more effective according to the 30,000 people that they did placebos and tests on. So, but look, at this point, it's like, let's at least minimize our risk that we're all going to die of it.
Well, that's what I think, there's been a lot of talk on the news about, I think people are sort of like, how can we know what the long-term, potency of these is? Like, how long do you have the antibodies for this? And like, you can't know because literally the only way that you know is to sort of, have it and then wait it out and then see. And we haven't been giving these vaccines the amount of time where you would normally know that. And that's because we're trying to get them out very quickly. But like, I don't think that we should actually be super hung up on that just because, I think that one of the things that has been so maddening about this, and specifically with our lack of, leadership from the top, is that, we know how long this vaccine, or not the vaccine, but how long the virus stays in your system and how long it takes for you to sort of like quarantine. Like, had we done this like many European countries did, and granted, then when they got it under control, they came back out and then it got bad again. But I mean, like, that if you really just sort of like take a month and don't do anything, then like you can get this under control. It helps a lot. So like, even if the antibodies for this from the vaccine don't really even last that long, like however long they last is helpful in like getting down the amount of the virus that's literally just like out in the world.
Well, and it might also just like help, I think some people who took the Moderna vaccine did get coronavirus, but none of them died, none of them got seriously ill. And so like it would also just be helpful if because like, look, there's no vaccine for the common cold, so you're just like out there getting the cold sometimes and you just hope you're not going to die of it, but you usually don't. And that's one nice thing about the cold.
Right.
So I feel like that's, something to aspire to, is just a sort of a way of minimizing.
And even with the flu, which we know that the coronavirus is more contagious than the flu and also is deadlier than the flu. But, when you think about the flu, not everybody gets the flu vaccine, and the flu vaccine itself is not 100%. It doesn't work 100% of the time, but it has gotten us to the point where like, yes, some people are still dying of the flu every year, but like we're now able to sort of like with that
it's not shutting down our country.
Right, exactly. So like this vaccine certainly the more people that get it and the better it works and the longer it lasts, the better. Like you want all of those things to, be at their best. Also, but even if only a certain number of people are getting it and it's only a certain percent effective and it's only effective for 3 months, then it's like you're still doing better than you were doing.
Well, and also it buys us some time because that's, it took this pandemic for me to learn that the flu was new when the Spanish flu happened. Like that 1918 was when we discovered the flu. So it wasn't like for years people had a flu and then this was just like an especially bad flu in 1918. Like there was no flu. And then in 1918 there was the flu. And then we've just had it ever since.
Yeah. And it's the same, at least in part, some of the same flu. I listened to a really interesting podcast about the flu. Like you can track the DNA or whatever the fuck it is, like back to that first flu from the flu that we still have.
That's the flu. That's the one. So we're probably going to have coronavirus because we have other coronaviruses that are always coming around. So we're probably going to have the coronavirus forever. Right. But what the flu vaccine allowed us to do was continue on with our lives. And every year we spend a year planning for the next flu vaccine. Yeah. And we can do that because other people got the first flu vaccine.
Yeah.
So I wrote something down about how these vaccines work. And I realized that in just reading it, I both don't care and don't fully understand it. So I feel like we should just skip it and not worry about it.
Done. We're not going to explain vaccine science to you because we can't.
Because you know what? We're not scientists.
Right.
I believe somebody understands this.
Try and do that.
No, I feel like once I saw RNA and I was like, I still don't really understand what RNA is. I know what DNA is sort of, but how that, I don't know any of it. I don't care too. That's the other thing is how it's nice to have an area of study that you can just offload onto someone else sometimes. Like, look, we're happy to have people offload their prop needs to us. We will do all that work for you. And you don't, if you are a person who wants to research it, you know, Godspeed. But if you're not, we'll still give you our prop guide and you don't have to research it. I feel that way about vaccine science. Yeah. I'm happy to have someone else know everything there is to know about vaccine science. And I'm happy to know nothing.
Well, you're not an expert. You're not a doctor. You don't know infectious disease. You're not, that's not.
No, I also don't care. I don't want to know more than I know about it. I want someone else to know enough about it so that I don't need to know anything.
Right.
So, moving on to the Million MAGA March.
The Million MAGA March.
The angry white supremacists wandering around the Capitol March.
Just chanting.
About how they hate Fox News. They are mad at this. Their turn on Fox News has been the most entertaining part of the entire election process.
Well, Trump has to drive that because he has to ultimately drive them to not watching Fox News for when his network launches, that they will all be there for the taking.
I mean, we all know that the whole reason he even ran for president was he was trying to launch a TV network.
It's hilarious.
We ruined his entire plan.
Yeah.
By idiotically electing him to be the president, and then he couldn't start a TV network because he had to be the president.
Right, now he can.
He's just been pouting in there in the White House this whole time.
But because he can, he has to kill Fox News first.
That's right.
And it seems like he's done a great job.
I feel like he's doing a great job. And look, I'm happy to have them go. You know, I'm happy to have all the cable news go. I would lose any of them. Lose MSNBC, lose CNN. I don't care. We'll go back to watching PBS News. It's boring, but you know what? The news is boring. And
the news should be boring.
News should be boring. But so I was watching some coverage on CNN about the Million MAGA March. And I love because Trump is so hard on them, they're really snarky now when it comes to anything having to do with him, which is why I love watching them over any of the other cable news networks.
Over CNN?
No, CNN is more snarky than MSNBC, and it used to be the other way around.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes, 100%.
CNN, I mean, I've been saying you should watch their election returns this whole time, even though everyone was still fangirling Steve Kornacki.
Yeah.
But
whatever, John King is just good.
John King's just, they're fine. Everyone's fine. At CNN is just better. But they were describing the march as hundreds of people, very pointedly. Like they would be like, we're at the Million MAGA March. Hundreds of people are walking around. And it was just sort of like a who's who of who's insane in America right now. They were there to say the election was stolen. So it's the kind of people that would believe that. It was like the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and the 3%ers and Alex Jones's people and Republican Congress member. I mean, there's all the crazies.
Yeah.
And they were just marching around openly being white supremacists. I mean, it was like a pretty pointedly white supremacist march. Yeah. And then they got into some clashes later in the day with counter protesters. And we know a couple things in general, one of which is the police did not fire rubber bullets or pepper spray at them.
Oh, of course not.
White supremacist march apparently should just be allowed to continue on, even though they are making threats the entire time. Right. And then about 20 people were arrested, one of them being someone from Mayor Bowser's office. So some like counter protesters are the ones who got arrested, obviously, because that's what would happen. And hilariously, Trump did a quick drive-by of the march, but he was on his way to play golf. So the entire day, the news was showing this march, which was like the craziest, very merch-filled. He is making a ton of money on merch. These people buy so much merch. I don't even know I mean, I was shocked to see that anyone had any Biden merch on the day that they announced the election. Because remember, there was like a guy with like a Biden flag at that, you know, when we were walking down Santa Monica, and I was like,
that was the whole thing. Everybody, we were like, where did
you haven't been displaying this whole time. It's been impossible to find a Biden sign in town. But so the whole day, the news was doing a split screen of this march and then Trump playing golf.
Amazing.
It was like a perfect.
So good.
And as our good friend of the podcast, Grant, pointed out, it was sort of perfect that this administration would end with McEnany lying about the crowd size.
No, that's how it began. And so that's still how it's going.
How it's ending.
Oh
but look, things are not going great for him right now. All of his court cases are getting dismissed, and things are desperate enough that he has put Giuliani in charge of those legal challenges, which is not what you do when you want results.
No. But I think that what he is doing here, and I did not invent this theory because it's not so hard to follow the money here, but like he has to sort of continue appearing as though he's doing something. And Rudy Giuliani is a person who can help you appear that you were doing something, because he is happy to be in front of a camera and happy to say something completely ridiculous and, you know, just be a total buffoon at the drop of a hat. So like if you're looking to just only appear as though you are up to shenanigans, then Rudy Giuliani is the perfect lawyer for you. And that is what they are doing. And it seems as though the reason that they are doing that is because they are continuing to ask for money. And it's not going to legal fees. It's going to wherever it is that it needs to be going if you're Donald Trump, who is in debt to all of Earth.
That's right.
So
it also doesn't help that his original person who was leading the efforts to steal the election in the courts or whatever got coronavirus.
Of course he did.
So
another fitting end to this.
Another fitting end to all of this, exactly. Yeah. But they got, as of Friday, I think they had 9 cases shot down, 6 in Pennsylvania. There were some in Arizona. There were some in Michigan.
Well, and they've been dropping some also.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, all of them have been patently ridiculous. Yeah. Because the one in Arizona, they dropped because they didn't have enough, their claims of fraud or wanting to review the ballots or whatever wouldn't have made up the margin anyway. Yeah.
Well, I think they've got to be close to that in Georgia too. I don't know if they're just more embarrassed about Georgia, but like that thing, you know, it was crazy because like we've all celebrated the point when Joe Biden finally creeped ahead of him and was ahead by only like 500 votes. And then everybody was just sort of like, oh, great, Georgia like turned blue. Votes. But like 2 weeks later now, it's something he's ahead by like 15 or 16,000 votes. And like, those are not what they are realizing. And all of, you know, the world has realized this many times before, but like, that is not an amount of votes that you find in a recount.
Right. Yeah. You can't discover missing 50,000 votes. And you also
in your
can't
favor in a
throw out, you know, they wanted to throw out like 9,000 absentee ballots in Pennsylvania. And it was like, well, you could throw those out, but that's not going to tilt the election.
Yeah. That so, like, Pennsylvania got too far gone. Also.
I think the reason they're pursuing Georgia is because of the Senate races.
I think so too.
They can't.
And they're trying to get everybody as riled up as possible. I think they're trying to make it as confusing for possible as everyone down there who's like trying to figure out still how to register for a new election while they're recounting the old one and realizing that they have to request a new ballot. And you've got the entire Republican congressional delegation from Georgia calling for the head of the Republican Secretary of State because he allowed people to legally vote. I don't know why. And
listen,
so like,
we're a country where in a nearby state, they voted to affirm that you need to be a citizen to vote, which is the most basic thing you need to be to vote. So who can possibly know? And in Louisiana, their general election day is December 5th because they only do runoffs on election day. So the whole South has no idea what they're doing when it comes to holding elections, obviously. And this is just another example of that.
But I think that you're right though. There's just as much shenanigans that can go on in Georgia right now.
Pure shenanigans.
Yeah.
It's so pure shenanigans that Warnock's campaign has started putting out a series of ads about how much he loves puppies because they accused him of not loving puppies. Like that's what's going on out there. I mean, it's,
oh my God.
Like, imagine you're running against Kelly Loeffler, who's like doing insider trading and is like an actual criminal. And their accusation is that you don't love puppies enough.
And David Perdue, who's done the same thing, I believe. No,
exactly. I mean, in that case, though, that race is more confusing because Jon Ossoff is like a non-entity of a human being. So it's like, what is he run? Like, what could he run on?
I know.
What would you say about him? You can't even accuse him of not loving puppies. He's not. There's nothing to accuse him of.
Yeah.
It's just like running against a stack of.
Jon Ossoff is the type of person who loves puppies the most if he's in front of puppy people, and loves cats the most if he's in front of cat people.
That's right. That perfectly describes the Jon Ossoff experience.
Yeah.
In any case, a lot of people are not happy in Trump world with Giuliani's involvement after he embarrassed them so roundly at the Four Seasons landscaping press conference. I'm enthrilled by it because there has not been a more entertaining political news story to hit. And this has been an era of entertaining political news stories. Like I was just watching a TV show that takes place in 2016 during the presidential election. And because of that, they reference that ad that Trump's people did about the Muslim ban, where they were going to shut down immigration until they could, quote, figure out what's going on in like a fancy, like VO voice that was like a movie trailer voice.
Yeah.
It was just like, it was like a parody of a parody of a fake government that was also the real government. I mean, it was just so like madness. Right. And I feel like this is sort of in the vein of figure out what's going on. Can you imagine making such a vague and ridiculously phrased like advertise, like that's your talking point in
I know.
a political ad that's been very slickly produced. Like, this is a man who came from Hollywood. Like,
I
image
know.
is the only thing he knows. Like, I can't understand how they're screwing this up so badly. But
I know.
in any case, people not happy. I am thrilled. I love it when Giuliani's at the face of something that's silly that Donald Trump is doing. It only gets sillier.
And you know that he's going to be unsuccessful too. Like, that is one thing that sort of like makes me feel okay that Rudy Giuliani continued to sort of like hop from place to place, because it's like
one of America's most tragic figures.
Between he and Pam Bondi, I mean, they're not gonna win any court case they get themselves wrapped up in. So you're fine. And that is sort of how I felt with, you know, there was, I think, and there's still sort of like is some, you know, we have been debating all week whether we're gonna have a coup or not.
Right.
And while that sort of scares me, because I feel like Trump supporters, I feel like we're starting to get into the point where we are like entering a world where like 50% of the country thinks the other is brainwashed, and then vice versa. Right. And like that's not great. And like that is not that's not the world in which maybe you want to be like trying a coup, because who knows what like 50% of the country just decides to get up to. But on a real sort of just like base level, there is part of me, and I will delete myself ever having said this.
Obviously, sure.
But
you're also saying it on the internet right now, so it's around forever.
I know, if a coup is successful, then we'll pretend like I never said this.
Yeah.
But on some level, I'm kind of like, let's let them try a coup, man.
Well, I saw some.
I mean, what a delight that could be. Like, because
there's any like, aren't we glad that the people who tried fascism here were incredibly stupid?
I know. It's like if there's a group of people who can't pull off a coup, then it's this lot. You know,
I mean, they can't.
And it might be our only chance to ever see it in America. So like, should we maybe just like
the real kind of coup?
I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it's scarier than that.
The real kind of coup that happens here is much more insidious and quiet than this. This is like a movie coup. It's like he's trying to do a movie coup, and we all like already know the playbook of a movie coup because we've watched movies. Right. And so like, try a movie coup if you want. He keeps removing people at DOD, and it's like, yeah, are they trying to have a coup? Sure. Yeah, they are. But like somewhat, like at a certain point, you need like some people in official capacities to also like go along with your coup. And I just like, as much as I often don't trust what the military's up to, I think in this case, I'm pretty certain that what they're not up to is wanting Donald Trump to be the president. Like, that just doesn't feel like where our soldiers' heads are at right now.
And even if they do, to come to his aid in that sort of way.
Well, I think
I mean, like that's the thing.
Totally. Like you have to think like they have to sort of like overcome a certain amount of their own inertia in order to actually support this kind of a process. And like, I don't know, like everyone in the Secret Service has coronavirus right now. Like Donald Trump is like someone who is currently frustrating even his closest compatriots. Yeah. Like, you know, Rudy Giuliani is the head of his legal strategy right now. I mean, just like, sure, have as many press conferences about the coup as you want. Like, announce anything. I think at this point, we're all basically proceeding like we have no president, and we're just sort of like assuming for now that we'll just go without for a while.
We'll just get to January, and then if we have to remove him at that point, then we will.
I am and if we dying to see him try to squat in the White House. I mean, my dream is that he continues to do nothing with himself, because the other thing is he's really bad at keeping up the facade that he doesn't know he's lost, because he keeps accidentally admitting it everywhere.
I know.
So like, it's like the whole thing is just like he can't even keep the secret that he like he can't keep a secret. So like what's on his mind is that he knows he's lost, and he's just desperately rooting around for any way to not leave. And like, I hope that where this ends is him just like refusing to physically move from the White House, and so that we can watch them physically remove him.
That's television right there, though.
That's television. Yeah. I have said this before. Those would be the best ratings he would ever see in his lifetime. And what does he love more than ratings?
Yeah.
Like, get that in his ear.
Yeah.
In any case, everything's a mess because he won't concede, and the Biden transition team, because of that, can't talk to his people. And so his people are even kind of like, we would really like to be talking to the Biden transition team, but they can't because Trump won't admit that he lost. And so instead, everyone is just sort of like living in their own world.
Right. And like in normal times, it's important to have, you know, a smooth transition, just because like, obviously, you know, that's just necessary. It makes sense for a million different reasons.
Right.
But right now, considering the amount of fuckeration that Trump has been up to, doing God knows what to the federal government, and then also considering that we're in a pandemic that has killed 250,000 people, and we've had like 12 million cases of, or whatever the number is now, who knows? Right. You need the two administrations to be on speaking terms.
Yeah.
With
or
each
you
other.
Don't.
Yeah, or not.
Or you don't, because I feel like that is the presumption that the Biden team made correctly, which was just sort of like, we would like to talk to them, but if they don't want to talk to us, we're just going to carry on.
Well, and I think that's why, Biden announced his own task force, and he announced, and they're getting their own briefings. They may not be getting the high level briefings that, they could be getting from the Trump administration, but even some Republicans have been like, look, we need to be giving the Biden administration.
Yeah. Senator Langford from Oklahoma, who's a real nobody of a human being, was even like, I'm going to get involved if they don't start giving him intelligence briefings, because it's like, people got to know stuff.
Yeah.
That's how he said it.
I saw an article that said, something about like Republican senator claims Biden campaign should receive, whatever. And it was a picture of him. And I was like, the fuck is that?
Never seen him before in my life. I know he took Tom Coburn's seat, because I also responded to my family chat with that, because I have a cousin who lives in Oklahoma.
Wait, no, Tom Coburn just got.
He's a dead person is what he is.
Who's the guy from Texas?
Died.
Who's the guy from Texas?
I don't know. It's not Tom Coburn.
Isn't it? Yes, it is.
Tom Coburn is a person who's dead. He's a dead person.
Who's
the senator from Oklahoma?
Reelected in Texas.
Whatchamacallit? Not Coburn. Is it the other guy?
I know.
It's not Ted
John
Cruz.
Cornyn.
John Cornyn. Him I can picture. Him I know what his face looks like.
Yeah, I do too.
Tom Coburn is someone I have personal animus towards, because in 2010 he was the lone senator who negotiated the 9/11 health bill down from a 10-year bill to a 5-year bill. And he was a fucking doctor. He's just like a monster of a human being. He's like from Oklahoma, like, go fuck yourself. Don't get involved in the 9/11 health bill. Just fucking vote for it and live your life.
Right.
But so in any case, he was like especially evil. Like, he was a uniquely evil person who continued, like, his reign of evilness lasted until I think 2016, when this complete nobody of a Republican took that seat, because Tom Coburn had cancer, and then he died earlier this year. And you know what? That's life when you're Tom Coburn. A lot of people also died of cancer who didn't have healthcare, and that was also thanks to Tom Coburn. So you got to deal with yourself. But so in any case, Langford is a person no one's ever seen or heard from, because he doesn't ever do anything that anyone notices. I'd never seen his face before. And then I was like, for a moment I was like, did Jeff Flake get plastic surgery? Because he looked vaguely kind of like a Flakean kind of figure, but
totally.
Jeff Flake, by the way, I think did, because I saw him on TV too, and I was like, he
probably did.
He's looking terrible.
Yeah, he probably did.
But in any case, so there are even Republicans getting involved, is our point, now that we're finally back at it.
That's right.
And Biden put together his own COVID task force. Vivek Murthy, who was the Surgeon General under Obama, is one of the 3 leaders. Vivek Murthy, who has just been touring a book about loneliness and then has been called back into the ring.
I know. Yeah.
Marcella Nunez-Smith and David Kessler are the other 2. She's a Yale doctor / researcher. He is a former FDA commissioner. They're leading a team of, I think, 12 task force members who all appeared on a Zoom call that they once again had a ridiculous image of him waving at. I can't have him waving at even one single more giant Zoom call. I know. I need all of his Zoom calls to take place on a normal size screen, and I need him to act like a regular person at said Zoom calls. I just I can't have any more displays of Zoom calls. After they misused that technology so egregiously during the DNC and had ridiculous people waving and dancing on the screen while he pointed at them as if they could see him point. Yeah. I refuse any more giant Zoom screens.
I agree. But like even people within the administration, like, certainly Fauci, which, we know that they have sort of a, tempestuous relationship with at this point, which is sort of like, yes, it would be better if we could start working with the Biden team like now. And then also the guy who is in charge of the entire vaccine effort, told the Financial Times that he wanted to reach out to Biden's team, but added that he couldn't do so without White House permission, which he doesn't have right now. That's the other thing. I mean, besides the fact that we sort of like, it would be nice to be coordinating like the messaging around whatever it is for COVID 19, it also, you know, trying to get 100 some million people a vaccine might take a little bit of coordination between the two administrations.
Listen, you have to believe that there is messaging to have, which the White House doesn't. So that's not a hindrance to anyone. And B, you have to have people who are competent enough to actually help you in those logistical efforts, which they are also not. So like,
but we know that Trump himself hasn't even gone to a task force meeting in 5 months. We found out recently. And also the guy who has his ear the most is Dr. Scott Atlas, who favors herd immunity. And also, you know,
that's the one where we all die.
Right. That's the one where we all die. Everybody gets it. And then however many, you know, hundreds of thousands
all of our
people
grandmothers
die.
and parents die.
Right. Exactly. And then also he's the one who sent that inflammatory tweet just yesterday, talking about how the people of Michigan should rise up against the new COVID-19 restrictions, which is an insane thing to say anyway, but also doubly insane in, of all places, Michigan,
a place where they did actually
tried to rise up and kidnap their governor. So like, don't be saying that to the people of Michigan. Like they don't need somebody within the administration telling them to do so. Like,
remember when Michigan's only concern was that all their trees were the right height?
Trees were the right height? Uh-huh.
Those were simpler times.
They really were. Yeah.
In any case, the Biden transition team has hopped into gear as well. They had begun already raising money for that operation back in May because I think they suspected that there would be not a lot of cooperation from the White House and it might be harder than usual. And also they might need to do it more quickly than you would normally do this. So it sounds like we're going to know about some cabinet positions, you know, just after Thanksgiving-ish. So that'll give us something to be mad about probably just in time for the holidays. So if you're worried, if you're thinking to yourself, what do I do with all the energy I was expending on being nervous about Donald Trump? There will be a gift given to you just after Thanksgiving where 1 to 2 Republicans will be in Biden's cabinet and you will be able to be angry about that. So,
yeah. And this is the, these are the, you know, as annoying as that is going to be, these are the fights that this was why we voted for Joe Biden, not because he would put Republicans in his cabinet, but because we knew that he would do it and we could preemptively fight him about it. And the fighting part would be the fun part. So like, if you've got like this, now is the time to tweet, to tell your friends, to remind all of your awful friends who were vote blue no matter whoing that Biden is about to be voting red in his cabinet positions.
That's right.
So like, gird your fucking loins here and like, you know, man up. Now's the time.
Well, also don't let yourself, I think people find themselves getting lulled into complacency because he made a comment about how it's important that his cabinet be diverse. And like, you know what? Your cabinet should absolutely be diverse to the extent that you shouldn't have to say that that's your priority. A priority of an effective cabinet for a Democrat should be that it's diverse, because having diverse points of view is part of what makes you know what people think. But whatever. That aside, we're handing out medals to people for things that they should just be doing. A promise of a diverse cabinet is not a promise of an ideologically diverse cabinet. Like, I think we have to make sure that when we are seeing cabinet positions go to people that check some sort of vague diversity box for Biden, that they also bring relevant experience and a useful point of view to him as well. I mean, you know who had a really diverse cabinet is W. But that doesn't mean that his cabinet was a cabinet of people that were representing the needs of many Americans. So, you know, I think we need to make sure that we're not bought off by optics here, because these kinds of decisions really matter in terms of, they matter to us as people who are going to be trying to push for a more progressive agenda as these specific cabinet people fight us.
Yep.
It is having conservative cabinet people that stops a lot of momentum on issues that are going to have to go through the legislature, but ultimately going to have to require the cooperation of the executive branch. I mean, we saw this with the with the 9/11 Health Act in the early years, where the Obama administration was just not interested in pursuing it under the HHS secretary that they had at the time. And they changed their tune at a certain point, but like it was the Obama administration that acted as the sort of initial roadblock to that legislation. And that was something that had to do with an Obama appointee. That had something, that was something that could have been solved by a different appointee being in that position at a different time. So these kinds of conversations, because these are not elected offices, are really important, but also make sure that you are focusing on every kind of diversity, including ideological, when he makes these cabinet appointments, so that you're not sort of seeing him, basically pander to us with vague promises of sort of like superficial identity politics without really offering people that can speak to the needs of regular Americans and understand the needs of regular Americans and can provide valuable points of view about those needs. In any case, the first lesson they learned, though, which I think is promising, at least that they know that they are going to have to contend with the left, is they very clearly ran his chief of staff idea by the sort of mouthpieces of the left before they announced it. So he appointed Ron Klain, who was his chief of staff, as a vice president. And listen, I'm not here to tell you that he's the greatest, but he had obviously been run past AOC. He'd been run past a lot of the people who, speak out against that wing of the party pretty frequently, and often about things like this, like about, not having a say in, how party governance is going to work. Everyone got on Twitter that day and was like, oh, good, Ron Klain. So it sounds like they at least knew that they had to, sort of run this by some people instead of just blindsiding. We expected them to blindside us.
Right.
Because that's normally what they're up to.
Yeah.
And especially given how vehemently sort of anti-left his rhetoric was during the race, how insulting he was to left-wing voters, in pretty explicit ways. I was a little surprised that they were at least smart enough to try to run this past some of the people who were most likely to raise alarm.
And I think to a certain degree,
I guess.
Yeah, right. And I think to a certain degree, the chief of staff is not going to be a position that like AOC is going to have like no, they aren't like, obviously they are sort of like, it's a potentially the most important position, at least to Biden himself in the but like, just in terms of like, running an agency, having, I guess he sort of is the gatekeeper to a certain degree, but like, he's not somebody that they were probably like going to fight him on. Also, this was probably the most obvious choice for him. He's been his chief of staff before. He was his chief of staff when he was in the Senate and when he was the vice president. He was Al Gore's chief of staff when he was Al Gore's chief of staff. Like, he has experience. He was the Ebola czar for Obama. So like, also you can sort of like sell him as someone who has experience, dealing with, well, that wasn't a pandemic because they got it under control, which I think is a selling point for Ron Klain.
Well, no, I think it has, it's like the difference between someone like this, who is sort of like a perpetual chief of staff person, and like Rahm Emanuel is, like, I think
people are teaming for a fight over Rahm Emanuel right now. They
are fools.
Do not give him a job.
Step anywhere near that man. But I can see why there was concern about who his, a chief of staff does become a thorn in the side of everyone when it's someone like Rahm Emanuel. Sure. And so this is like a function. This guy is like a sort of professional chief of staff, basically. Like, he's like a professional functionary of government, like bureaucratic functionary. And that's different than a sort of more political appointee for chief of staff, which is always a possibility. So, so I think that's probably why they were relieved by his.
He also had a big role in the implementing the Recovery Act after the the crash in 2008, after when we went into the Great Recession. And I have mixed thoughts about that, because like, obviously I think anybody looking back, both even people in the middle, I think sort of looking back at that now, realize that part of the reason that recovery took as long as it did, even though we did ultimately recover, was because there wasn't enough upfront being done. And Klain was one of the people who was sort of like worried about the price tag being too big, but he was also worried about but he was also worried about he was also, I think, worried about the messaging in the sense that, like, I think a lot of people in the Obama circle thought that it was going to be easy to sort of like sell, some sort of investment program after we had literally just had a crash, and that it was really actually Klain who I think saw fairly early on that it was not going to be quite as easy as maybe everybody coming in was going to see. So like, I can see both sides of, the positive and negative for him there. Like, is that going to scare him off from trying to pitch a giant price tag to people? Or is that going to like lead him to understand that if we're going to try and sell that, then we're going to have to do it well? I don't know,
Right.
We don't sell anything
very
well
different
as Democrats. It's the nature of being a Democrat, is that
right.
You're poor salespeople.
Right, you don't sell. And he is somebody who famously is part of administrations that are bad at selling ideas that aren't Republican ideas. So
yeah,
that's a tradition he'll carry forward proudly.
Yeah,
he was also the top attorney for Gore's recount effort in Florida. I don't know if that inspires much confidence, but
it doesn't. He was played by Kevin Spacey in Recount, which I feel like I hope that's not some sort of omen, because that's not great either. It's not who you want to be played by, at least these days.
But he's been in private practice for a little while now.
Yeah.
Or since
manages the holdings of AOL founder Steve Case.
Oh, good. I don't know what that means.
I was reading this one article about like, who is Ron Klain, and a lot of the things that we just told you was in there, but then there were a couple other things where it was like he was the editor of the Harvard Law Review. So as I was taking notes, I started a section that I'm calling, if you can see our document right now, it's called Ron Klain Fun Facts. Fun facts are
They're not fun,
but there's ended up not being fun, and there's only 2 of them. So.
Also, did Kamala Harris choose Karine Jean-Pierre to be?
I don't think officially she has.
Staff?
I think that she
has
been
that was her chief of staff.
Right.
But there was at one point when Ron Klain got announced, there was a lot of buzz in the air about Karine Jean-Pierre, and then I was looking today to find out how official that had been, and it turned out not very official.
I don't think very.
But
yeah.
She would be someone that might be in the mix.
Yeah. And I think people would be, again,
fine with. Oh yeah, she's somebody that I think would be a good choice for Kamala.
Yeah.
So we have an important update from election results last week, especially the prop election results.
Yeah, because I was in Arizona this weekend, visiting my dad, flying in the face of all of the public health orders. So at me, whatever. Anyway, I was inside at his house for like 36 hours and like didn't go anywhere. So what are you going to do? And I drove.
You don't need to.
Anyway, I was going to say, it's like, I'm not going to jump through the mental gymnastics that are necessary for me to do it. It's not necessary on this podcast, but whatever. Anyway, but I was there and I was asking him, I was like, just jokingly, I was like, so when are you going to go, get your legal marijuana? And he was like, he wasn't sure when that kicked in or whatever. So I researched and I was like looking at the Arizona props and realized there was a prop called Prop 208. And lo and behold, it's a 3% income tax increase for people making $250,000, single people, or for $500,000 for a married couple. And that shit passed, guys. You want to know what? It got more votes. It got more yes votes than Joe Biden got votes.
Progressive policy is really popular, you guys. It just can't be called socialism.
I know.
You know what socialism is? Asking people to pay more in taxes so that everyone can have things.
I would bet that every single Democrat running for office nationwide, moderate anyway, not any of the ones that this podcast knows and loves, probably would have run away from this proposition. They would have run for the hills. They would have, some reporter would have said, hey, what do you think about Arizona Prop 208? And they would have been like, oh, I don't know what Prop 208 is. It would have been
a ball of smoke.
I don't know all the details. And then they would have been like, oh, it's a 3% tax increase on people who make $250,000. And they would say, oh, well, I don't know all of the details of it, so I'm not going to get into that, and blah, 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 blah. Where like, obviously the answer to what do you think about Prop 208 is
thumbs up.
Yes, I stand for Prop 208. We should pass it nationally. We should institute it we should put it on every state ballot. And then every single Democrat who's running in that state that has it as a ballot proposition should tie themselves to it. It just sort of goes back to the very lengthy conversation that we had that we don't necessarily like need to completely rehash from last week about these, because we talked about how conservative states passed marijuana legalization, which Joe Biden himself doesn't even favor.
$15 an hour minimum wages,
right, which he does favor, but I don't know is necessarily sort of one of his big calling cards. But they all outperformed whatever Democrat is winning in the state. I mean, Montana didn't vote for Steve Bullock, who they voted for before, but they voted to legalize marijuana. I would be curious to know whether
Florida voted for Donald Trump and raising the minimum wage at the same time.
Right.
People went to the polls and they were like, I should vote for Donald Trump, but I definitely want the minimum wage to go up.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, there's no accounting for sanity.
Yeah. Well, and a couple thousand people voted for Donald Trump and then voted to raise people's taxes.
To tax the rich.
Because as it turns out, that's what you like. And that brings me back to a point that we did really hit on last week. And this is a point that I'm willing to re-hit on. We don't need to, I just said we don't need to have the whole conversation again, but this conversation, conversation again. I think California, I've been thinking about this a lot because the props, we talked last week about how we hate the props.
We screwed up all of them.
We talk about it all the time and we screwed up a lot of them. But I also think that just because so many moderate Dems, I think probably would have said that this was, a bridge too far, this Prop 208 in Arizona. I think that we've really gotten to this point where, and it's scary to me, where moderate Democrats, of which there are a lot of in California, obviously, there's a lot of Joe Biden lovers in California,
a lot of Bidens out
there, are really getting far too close to mainstream Republicanism in a way that we've been talking. I was going to say we've been talking about for a long time about how we're afraid that is going to happen, and how we feel like there is a lot of things that we as Democrats, if we sort of embrace some things on the left, could actually speak to some people on the right about. And if there's things that the Tea Party is mad about, it's corporatization, it's the rich getting richer, and for mainstream Democrats to throw their lot in with anti-tax Republicans in the way that I feel like they so often have over the last few years is this prop in Arizona. While I'm glad passed, really gives me a lot of pause seeing what California did, because I think that the Democratic base has lost the thread.
I think nationwide, that's part of the problem with not having a real sort of set of principles that we're fighting for. Because I think that's, first of all, the California props need what all of Democrats and Republicans need, which is campaign finance reform. We cannot allow giant corporations to buy policy for themselves. And that's how the California props are used. That's not how the props are used in most other states. That's why we have this uniquely bad track record in California, is the kind of money that's going into advertising those props is very different than what's going into advertising props in Arizona.
Yeah.
So, part of it is not the fault of voters for being uninformed, because you can't blame voters for not being informed about the props. It's too much work.
Right.
It's not even necessarily the fault of the sort of of the Democrats that are working on these issues, because they are just beholden to different masters than us.
Yeah.
I think it is a courageous choice to not take corporate funding, but it is actually the only way that you can hold principles as a politician.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, what we see with Democrats who appear to be principled, but are kind of middling, is that they've had to choose which principles they're allowed to have and which ones they're not allowed to have.
Right.
And the reason they're also jealous of the squad is because all of them don't have any corporate donors, so they can have whatever principles they want. Yeah. And that anger is, I think, what I heard in those moderate frustrations towards the left from last week, was they're just incredibly frustrated because they don't understand how to exist in a world where these people are allowed to be out there saying popular things and no one is stopping them. And, right. Most Democrats live in a world where they're not allowed to stand for anything.
Right. Yes.
And that, it is Brent who said this first, but then I wrote a Huffington Post piece about it and took all the credit. But
That's fine.
The only issue is campaign finance reform. It's the only one that matters.
Yeah.
It's everything. And this is a perfect example of why, because nationwide. We're seeing, slightly under the radar props with progressive policies succeed. And Democrats are so beholden to their, corporate overlords that they're not even allowed to stand for the policies that their electorate wants them to. And,
Yes.
and as I said last week, Trump voters are not Reaganite Republicans.
No.
Trump voters are wacky. And their wackiness, they speak the language of populism. And you know who else can speak that language is the left.
The left, right.
But they are the kind of people who are receptive to clear, concise policy goals. Donald Trump doesn't deliver on those, but he certainly offers them. He's got clear ideas that are crazy, but they're clear. I guess if you don't want to have to wade through a complicated Obamacare style health plan, you're just like, well, he says he's not going to get rid of whatever. What do I know? But I mean, like, we can speak to those people. We can't speak to all of them, obviously. Some of them are lost in hate. Some of them are just awful. Like, but you can't speak to everyone. But like, a lot of those people, I think, got so lost from us because we took this corporate turn. And the fact that we are not only not willing to invest in ideals, but also that we are censuring the people that can speak to those people. And we are part of what's, like, it is moderate Democrats that are allowing the squad to be cast as radicals because they don't want to be associated with them. They should not be allowing...
Just associate with them.
Exactly. They should not be allowing AOC to be cast as a radical. They should be allowing her to say things that they can't say because of their donors or whatever, and covering for her when they can. And they aren't doing that because they're so mad that they can't stand for anything. But it's like, well, you could just, if you were standing for things, maybe people would fund your campaign.
Yep.
In any case, it is policy, progressive policy wins elections.
That's right.
I don't know what goes on. The moderate Democrats have way lost the thread.
Yeah.
I mean, we lost the thread back in the 90s.
I mean, I think so too. Yeah.
That's when
we threw ourselves in with big business.
Yeah.
We didn't do this recently. This has been a downward spiral that's been going on for 30 years.
We started to lose the thread under Carter, but he was at least like a decent person.
Right.
The Clintons are how we lost the thread. And it was because they were the Democrats that could compete with the Republicans because they were willing to take soft money. And it was all about money, and it's all about campaign finance reform. And if you are looking for evidence of how that impacts your everyday life and why campaign finance reform is the only issue that matters, think about literally any single issue that no one can get any legislation passed on that is polling at 98%. Gun control.
Yep.
It is campaign finance reform that is the reason that we cannot pass gun control legislation. Yep. It is because politicians who know that even their constituents want this are being bought by the NRA.
We can't get Medicare for all.
It's why we can't have Medicare for all. It's why we can't have, more responsible, rent control laws. It's why we can't have,
prescription drug costs.
It's like, literally think of any issue that is just like a thorn in your side every day that is really popular that you're like, I don't understand why this isn't just like a thing everyone agrees on. The problem is not that everyone doesn't agree on it. The problem is that, Democrats are not able to advocate for any of these changes and are often the ones standing in our way of achieving them. So in any case, guys, get this on your state ballot.
Yeah.
If Arizona can pass an income tax increase,
anybody
can too.
Yes.
Maybe with the exception of the tax haven of Delaware, which is ironic because that's where the president comes from. The incoming president comes from. In any case, one final note that is a non sequitur that has nothing to do with anything, but I just saw several articles about it this week and I've been really enjoying this conversation.
Yeah.
Everyone wondering where Jared and Ivanka will go because, listen,
they
New York City's not going to want them back.
Yeah. And they need to go into like some sort of like witness protection because they would love to go back to high society. And
of course, but there's just no, like, they are part of this like elite, and listen, some evil people are part of that society. So it's not necessarily that being evil is out of bounds amongst those people. It's just that they are like stupid evil. Like they used to be part of the like fancy society where people went to fancy schools and then they were fancy together and they like hung out with Chelsea Clinton and stuff like that.
Right.
And now they're going to be just like jokes.
Yeah.
And you can own all the real estate in New York City that you want, but you can't buy friendship. So that's going to be,
there you go.
They're going to be, I have a theory about where they're going to head. And I think it is to LA.
Here? Yeah.
Yeah. That's where you go when you've failed out of New York, as we all know. But I mean, if you are too tacky for New York, go to Hollywood.
Yeah. People will take them. Some people, I don't know who, but.
All of this though, I did have a moment where I thought to myself earlier this week as I was reading these stories, what will we do for entertainment next year? And then I remembered the Jimmy Coco story from West Hollywood, and I was like, we're going to be fine. Remember the asthmatic cat in Larry Block's apartment complex that Jimmy Coco was renting? And he's a celebrity tanner, for those of you who aren't living in West Hollywood. And there was that brilliant story about how Larry Block, who's a city council person in West Hollywood, was trying to.
Well, he ran for city council. Yeah.
Well, he runs every.
Well,
Larry
yeah,
Block is
right,
always running for city council. Yeah. But he was trying to kick Jimmy Coco out of an apartment, and then he tried to stay because his cat was asthmatic or something like that. And I just thought, like, we're gonna be okay.
Right. There's always something.
There's always something. So rest assured.
Oh man.
But the news will stay as ridiculous. It will just be less life or death for you.
Maybe we can get back to talking about sinkholes.
Oh my God. Remember when that brought so much joy to our lives? Or like snakes and trees? I mean, tree snakes.
Oh my God, I know, that's right.
There were so many great stories that we covered.
Snakes out of trees, yes. God.
I hope they've
resolved those were the days.
I saw an opening with murder hornets, but it just never materialized.
No, it didn't.
It's like we've lost the plot multiple times.
Yeah,
there were UFOs this year. There were murder hornets. It's like nothing stuck.
Yeah. Those will stick next year. It'll be great.
Yeah. It'll be glorious. In any case, that's the news this week.
There it is.
We will talk to you next week when hopefully we can bring you more stories like that. There was a sinkhole recently that my mom called me about, but I forgot where it was.
Yeah, well, we used to talk about sinkholes so much that your dad called a sinkhole radio.
I know. And that, for a while, brought me great joy.
I know.
That was sinkholes. There's a few things I love. I love sinkholes. I love twins.
We could be talking about twins more often.
We could be talking about twins more often. I mean, Mark Kelly is a twin.
Oh, that's true. We could, yeah.
So we're going to get to talk about twins more.
Yeah.
But all of these, we've lost the thread on all of these because Donald Trump sucked up all the air. And that's
going to be great, guys.
It's going to be so great. In any case, we'll talk to you next week.
Yeah.
Be good and stay home.
Yes.
Bye.